Welcome to Civics and Coffee. My name is Alicia, and I am a self-professed history nerd. Each week, I'm going to chat about a topic on U.S. history and give you both the highlights and occasionally break down some of the complexities in history and share stories you may not remember learning in high school, all in the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. Hey peeps, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday and are enjoying some much-deserved time off. A few weeks ago, I was able to get two fabulous women onto the show to discuss one of the biggest political controversies in the United States history, Watergate. Rachel and Leah from #History are simply awesome. As you'll hear me gush a little in the episode, I am a super fan of their show and highly recommend giving them a listen. Once you're done here, of course. This is a little longer than my usual fare, but it's Watergate. And though we spent a good amount of time covering the various aspects of the scandal that ended Richard Nixon's presidency, we only scratched the surface. A few things I wanted to say before we dive in. We did our episode via Zoom, so the audio quality may dip a bit. I also forgot to give some details about G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt. I'll provide little blurbs about them at the end. Sit back and relax and enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to a special edition of Civics and Coffee. I am joined by two ladies that I absolutely adore. I found these ladies when I first started doing my own history podcast journey, randomly on Instagram. They had just posted about a visit to Alcatraz, and I just immediately fell in love, binged all of their episodes, and I have talked about them before, and I've posted about them on Instagram and social media. So it is my infinite pleasure to welcome Leah and Rachel from #History. Ladies, welcome.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that introduction. I don't know if I can live up to that.
I feel like my cheeks hurt because I was smiling so much. Thank you so much. We're so happy to be here.
Yeah.
Yes. I knew kind of from moment one that as soon as I heard that you ladies do collaborations and you do guest spots, I was like, oh, I have to get to the par where I can have those ladies come on. And I had to think of like the biggest controversy and conspiracy I could think of to have us on our collaborative episode.
And I'm so excited that we're doing this one together because it is one of those super controversial events in history that has obviously been on our list of potential topics to cover forever, but it's so huge that it's so daunting.
Yes.
So that's why I'm really glad that we're doing this all together because, you know, we all had the opportunity to research different components of it. And I think this is the best way to do it so we can really do this topic justice.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I agree. But before we talk about the topic, I would like to give you ladies a moment to introduce yourselves and tell my audience how wonderful you are and all about your show.
Well, thank you again. So I am Rachel.
And I'm Leah.
And we are the dynamic duo, I guess I will say, of the #History podcast, where we cover history's greatest stories of controversy, conspiracy, and corruption. So, you know, similar in vein with what we're covering this week, we have also covered topics like the Salem witch trials or JFK assassination, Chappaquiddick. Oh gosh, I mean, we've covered it all. And then something else really fun we do, I'll pass it off to Leah because we do something else fun with each of our episodes.
Yeah, kind of like drunk history, but not quite that bad. We every week or every episode, we pair a cocktail with it that kind of fits in with the theme or is named after the topic or something like that. So we always like to tie in a little cocktail, sip it as we tell the story and make it a little bit more fun for those who might not be, you know, history lovers.
And so without further ado, I think we can unmask the topic that we're going to try to talk about. It's a story that is well known, but yet not well known. It was a story that I think I knew about, but as I dove into it more and more, I realized I really didn't know as much as I thought I did.
Yeah.
So we are talking about Watergate.
Ooh, dun, dun, dun.
It's a big one. It's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So, but before we do that, because we're in it for the long haul, I think on this episode, we have a cocktail. And so I want to learn about this cocktail. So, Leah, I'm going to pass this on to you.
I debated what kind of cocktail to find for this topic. And then I stumbled upon a cocktail actually named after President Richard Nixon, who is involved in Watergate. If you don't already know that, you'll learn all about it.
Just a little
Maybe.
Allegedly. Hey, we said the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. And our listeners know I am nothing if not literal when it comes to my cocktail selection. So I went with, the cocktail named after the dude. So according to the restaurant guys, the Nixon was created in 1969 to mark then President Nixon's visit to Britain. It was mixed in the American Bar, which I guess is like a famous bar kind of near Buckingham Palace, and then sent over to Claridge's where Nixon was staying. And I looked up, both of these places still exist and are running in London if anyone's interested in going. So the Nixon contains 1 part bourbon to 1 part sloe gin. It's spelled SLOE. I think it's slow. Mm-hmm. And then in this recipe, I went with muddled peach slices, but there's other recipes that I found that call for peach bitters instead. But I definitely wanted the sweetness of muddled peaches versus peach bitters because that's it. Those are all the ingredients. It's just like pure alcohol with some muddled peaches in it. So I'm a little nervous, but I would love, what we like to do on our podcast is try it, taste it all together, and then kind of give a rating on a scale of 1 to 10 of how much we love it. 0 or 1 being like never again, barf, and 10 being possibly the best cocktail we've ever had.
Love this. I'm so excited. I've never had sloe gin before. But I didn't take a sip of the cocktail. I took a sip of the sloe gin as I was making the cocktail, and sloe gin alone is delicious. So I cannot wait.
All right. Yeah. Here we
cheers.
Go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
It's definitely strong.
Yes, it is. Hello.
Oh. I even watered mine down a little bit. I put a little water in addition to ice in mine because I knew it was going to be so strong.
You literally watered it down.
Because it reminds me of an old fashioned kind of. And I know a lot of times they say if those are too strong for you to just splash a little water in there. And it kind of tastes like an old fashioned too.
It does.
Like a peach old fashioned.
It does.
I like it though.
It is oddly refreshing. I was not expecting refreshing. I was expecting a punch to the gut.
Yep.
So, but that is definitely later. Something. Yeah. I'm going to have to sip that thing for sure.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. If we want to get through this episode without slurring the entire way.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Help us all. This is going to be rough. I would say, so I'll start the rating. I'm actually pretty high up on this one. I feel like I'm an 8. I really, really like it a lot.
Yeah.
I think I'm savoring it because you really can only take little sips of it. You can't gulp it. And so you get all the flavors of it. It's really, really tasty.
Yeah. I'm gonna also, it's a very high for me. I'm going to say probably an 8 for me as well. All of our listeners know that I am obsessed with bourbon, anything bourbon. When we just recently went on a girls' trip for my 30th birthday, and we may or may not have bought a bottle of bourbon, Wild Turkey bourbon, that just for me, no one else wanted it.
I was going to say that only you took shots of.
Okay, so for me, I will say I was very terrified with this drink because I am not a bourbon drinker and I'm not a gin drinker. So I was like, cool, bourbon and gin put together. What's this going to be? But it's refreshing. I'm sure I will be slurring by the end of the episode. Yep. So, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a 6 or 7, 6.5. I'm going to give it 6.5.
All right.
That's a good, good
really
solid rating.
Yeah. Really anything over 5 is a good rating on our show. So
love it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, as I like to tell my people every week, grab your cup of coffee, peeps, or in our case, we're grabbing our cocktails. Let's do this.
So I thought before we dive into the Watergate scandal that we might actually want to touch on Richard Nixon himself. Few politicians have the same kind of resume that Nixon had. He was a congressman, a senator, and vice president before becoming the 37th United States president. And he was the first and only president to ever resign from office. Born on January 9th, 1913 in Yorba Linda, California, Richard Milhouse Nixon was super intelligent and super ambitious from the get-go. He was a very successful student, and he actually graduated at the top of his class in law school. He served as an operations officer in the U.S. Navy during World War II, and upon his return from the service, got involved in politics. He served as a congressman and later won a seat in the U.S. Senate. Nixon would serve as vice president alongside President Dwight Eisenhower in 1952 and 1956. Later, Nixon lost his own presidential campaign against none other than John F. Kennedy, and this defeat was rather historic. In fact, the popular vote would become the narrowest popular vote of the 20th century, with Kennedy winning 49.7% and Nixon winning 49.6%. This presidential election also marked the first televised presidential debates, and these didn't do Nixon really any favors. Nixon appeared nervous and sweaty during the debates in comparison to the young, suave, charming Kennedy. We could talk literally forever about this particular presidential election, but I digress. Following the defeat, Nixon returned to his home state of California, all of our home state of California, and attempted a campaign for governor, but he also lost here. It was looking like things in the politics realm were over for Nixon, but then came 1968. In the midst of the Vietnam War and a wave of assassinations, including those of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, a change in pace, aka a stable conservative Republican such as Richard Nixon, actually looked like that could be a good choice. For those very conservative and stable reasons, many didn't actually have much hope that Nixon would accomplish very much as president. But he actually did take on quite a few rather large projects during his term. His administration was responsible for things such as cost of living adjustments, guaranteed income for the elderly, food stamps, health insurance, the first affirmative action programs, and the funding of the EEOC and the creation of OSHA. Of course, there are all kinds of caveats to all of that, but generally speaking, Nixon was a go-getter and he was relatively well respected for it. He was not, however, particularly liked nor trusted. In fact, he had the nickname of Tricky Dick, and he had actually gotten that name quite some time before even winning the election because he was considered to be a wishy-washy, untrustworthy person. But in comparison to some of his contemporaries, he was respected for his time and experience in politics. Those that had reservations about his character, however, would find that they were right in 1972.
Indeed. And so on June 17th, 1972, just after 2 a.m., 5 men were arrested mid-burglary at 2600 Virginia Avenue Northwest. This address was the infamous Watergate complex and was the location of the Democratic National Committee headquarters. The men had cameras and were dressed in business suits and were caught photographing communications from the Democratic Party.
Oh my God.
Whoopsie.
Come on.
They were discovered by a security guard. His name was Frank Wills, and Wills actually discovered them completely by accident. He noticed tape on a garage door that was taped horizontally, and apparently they were supposed to be taping it vertically so it didn't show. That's how they got in. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. And he had actually seen a very similar taped door situation earlier in his rounds, didn't think anything of it, removed the tape, went about his business, and then when he saw it for the second time, was like, oh, wait a minute. Something's up. Yeah. And decided to call the cops.
Wow.
So the burglars also were supposed to, once they were inside, they were supposed to just remove the tape behind them. So on multiple fronts, they failed, right? They were supposed to be taping it vertically so it wouldn't be discovered. They taped it horizontally, and then they were supposed to take it off once they got inside, and they just didn't do it.
Fail, fail, fail.
At so many points along this story, if they had just done one or two things differently, we would have never known
we
about
wouldn't be
this.
talking about this.
Exactly.
You know, and I find that just that piece about the tape, how he came across it twice in one day, so fascinating, because I think we can all say that in like our everyday lives, that like you see one thing, you're like, that's kind of weird, whatever. But you don't do anything about it the first time. The second time, you're like, okay, this is kind of weird. Maybe I should investigate.
Maybe I should look into this a little bit more. And so the burglars, they even had a lookout across the street, but their lookout was distracted watching television and missed the arrival of police officers. He also didn't notice the police officers were police officers because they were in plain clothes and therefore didn't really stand out. They didn't come out in their uniforms. One was dressed as a hippie and one actually had a cowboy hat on because they were on this special assignment.
What an interesting world to live in, where like undercover cops dress like cowboys, like
right. And so the final transmission from the Watergate burglars to their lookout was a whispered, "They got us." The arresting officers were Sergeant Paul Leeper, Officer John Barrett, and Officer Carl Schaffler. And the men that were arrested were James McCord, Virgilio, I apologize, Gonzalez, Frank A. Sturgis, Eugenio Martinez, and Bernard Barker. All of these men would have some form of ties to either the CIA, the FBI, or the Committee to Re-elect the President, which was nicknamed CREEP, which I just again...
And it's just like, I mean, I know you're going to get into this. We're all going to get into this, but it's just how deeply rooted these ties are to, I mean, they are members of the FBI, the CIA, the re-election campaign.
Yep.
There's no denying those associations.
Exactly. So James McCord, he was a former CIA and FBI agent and was actually the security coordinator for the committee for the re-election of the president. He was actually arrested under an alias, but they found out who he really was within like 24 hours of his arrest. So that his alias apparently didn't hold up very well. Virgilio Gonzalez was a locksmith from Miami who immigrated from Cuba as a refugee and also was believed to have been partaking in some anti-Castro moves, like might have been a part of like the Bay of Pigs, very, very anti-Castro movement. Frank Sturgis was a former CIA operative, and Eugenio Martinez had CIA connections and was also considered an anti-Castro Cuban exile. And then Barker randomly was currently serving as a realtor in Miami, but was also a former CIA operative.
There had to be one oddball.
Exactly, right? So upon their arrest, how this all started to kind of tie together was they had evidence on hand tying them to the committee to re-elect the president, including the contact number for the White House re-election committee and contact information for E. Howard Hunt. And Howard Hunt is later found out to be one of the members of the Plumbers, the group known as the Plumbers, who was started after the leak of the Pentagon Papers. And he was put in charge of preventing future leaks like the Pentagon Papers because Richard Nixon was paranoid.
Yeah.
So when they were arrested, they were charged with attempted burglary and attempted interception of telephone and other communications. They had thousands of dollars in cash on hand, mostly $100 bills, and in another ingenious move, in sequential order.
Oh my God.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Totally normal to have sequential bills.
Suspicious.
And apparently, according to G. Gordon Liddy, so again, take it with a grain of salt. G. Gordon Liddy is a gentleman who was also arrested later. He was indicted for his involvement in the Watergate scandal. But according to his autobiography of the events, after the arrest, the former Attorney General, John Mitchell, who had resigned as Attorney General to head up CREEP, apparently tried to get the current Attorney General, Dick Clendence, I think is how you say his name. I don't know. To get James McCord out of jail before his true identity was found out. So they knew, they were like, oh no, our guy is in jail. He's got an alias, but we don't know how long it's going to last. And we need to get him out because if they find out, there's a direct tie to the president.
Oof.
Was not successful. The AG told him, absolutely not. I will not do that. So here we go. So why were they there? So they were actually trying to fix a bug already placed on DNC chairman Larry O'Brien's telephone. So they had already been in there multiple times doing bugging and counter surveillance operations. There had been 3 previous attempts made to break in and bug their offices beginning on May 28th, 1972.
Ooh.
So again, comedy of errors. If they had just done it right the first time, we might not be here.
Oh my God.
So the first time, E. Howard Hunt and Virgilio Gonzalez were trapped in a closet due to an alarm being set. So the original plan was that they were going to wait in a closet in one of the big ballrooms and then go upstairs and place the bugs. But the alarm set at 11 o'clock and they couldn't get out before then because there was traffic around. They didn't want to risk being seen. And so they spent the night in the closet.
That's a literal comedy movie. That's a literal comedy movie. I can imagine them the entire time standing there like, I'm so hungry. I'm so thirsty. Like,
there's a bucket over there. I'm getting a little desperate here.
Well, actually, funny you should mention that because Hunt, apparently, it was a liquor closet, I think, or there was liquor in the closet with them. And Hunt, after spending the night in the closet, told Liddy, don't have a drink at this hotel for a while. Don't have any, I believe it was bourbon. I don't remember exactly the drink. I know. The irony.
Oh, the irony. That's what we're having.
Bourbon. Because, of course, he got desperate and used a bottle to contain his. Yep.
What? Okay. Word to the wise people. If you are ever in a similar situation, drink the entire contents of the bottle and then you can use it. Don't waste bourbon.
Yeah.
Travesty.
A true travesty.
So that was the first attempt. The second failed attempt was because the burglars did not have the right equipment. So he was a locksmith, but apparently he didn't have the right tools. And they were actually a little worried at first because they had mentioned, yes, they were messing with it and they kind of messed up the lock. And so they were worried that somebody would discover that the lock was tampered with and then everything would go into, DEFCON 5. But apparently they lucked out and nobody noticed that the lock had been tampered with.
Wow.
But can you imagine like a locksmith doesn't have the right tools to break into a lock?
No, like we brought you for a reason. You had one job.
The third time was successful. They placed some bugs and stole some campaign documents. But the night of June 17th, that fourth trip, so they had gone in, tried 2 unsuccessful attempts. The third attempt was successful, but the fourth trip was actually to fix some of the bugs that were placed. So some sources said that it was just regular routine maintenance, but a couple of the sources said that it was to replace a defective bug. Liddy, in his autobiography again, who was intimately involved in the break-in and the cover-up and all of the terrible, terrible things, said that it was really to replace the bug. So I'm going to go with him. And so they were trying to replace one of the bugs. And once they found out that there was going to be a fourth mission, they were ordered to take pictures of all of the printed material in the DNC office. So they wanted all the campaign files, all the donor information. They were supposed to take photos. And then, so Barker and Martinez were sent in to take photos, and Gonzalez was there to pick the locks. And James McCord, was there to fix the bug.
Wow. 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 And I mean, you're teaching me a lot here. I'm assuming this direction is coming from the very top down, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
So the operation in and of itself was planned by one G. Gordon Liddy under gemstone operations titled Opal and Topaz. So as we discover during the trial, so I am skipping ahead just a smidge, but as we discover during the trial, this was actually a package of different operations that they were planning on doing, all aimed at destroying the Democrats' chance at election in 1972. So they had everything from, we're going to hire hookers and take photographs of Democratic senators in compromising positions and use that as blackmail, to we're going to plant fake stories in the newspaper. And it was all these different types of programs or different types of investigative activities that they could do in order to undermine the Democrats' chance for winning in the 1972 election.
So much effort, all sparked by complete paranoia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nixon was very, very paranoid. Very, very paranoid.
Wow.
So the original cost estimate for all of the different plans that G. Gordon Liddy came up with was upwards of $1 million. And so he was told, that's too expensive. You have to pare it down a little bit. And so that's why they picked Opal and Topaz, because they were within budget.
So that's why we don't have a diamond or a pearl. Got it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So Liddy was the one who was he was on site at the Watergate Hotel the night that the 5 men were arrested, but he and Hunt were not arrested right away. They were able to get away because they were across the street. And like I said, they had a number of plans in place. So the bugging and the photographing of the Democratic National Committee materials was just one of a plethora of plans that they had. Another really odd plan that they had that I just found very interesting, it was like, okay, that's one way of doing things, is they were going to hire hippies to pee in front of George McGovern, who was running for president as the Democrat, right? They were going to have these hippies show up, and as McGovern starts speaking, just take a leak right in front of George McGovern in the middle of his hotel room.
Yeah. I actually, you're teaching me so much, but that is the one like random side interesting fact that I knew about Watergate was this like hippie operative.
What the heck? I hadn't heard of that. That's stupid.
Yep. And the only reason why he didn't do that is because John Mitchell was supposed to be staying at the hotel suite, that same hotel suite, right after George McGovern left. That was literally the only reason why that plan was scrapped.
The only reason. There wasn't someone else on this committee that could have been like, hi guys, maybe we should write up pros and cons, or like maybe think about this a little more.
After they were arrested, they had some prosecutors assigned to the case. So the prosecutors for the case were Earl Silbert, Seymour Glanzer, and Donald Campbell. And though G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt initially escaped from being arrested, they were indicted for conspiracy, burglary, and violation of federal wiretapping laws on September 15th, 1972. So G. Gordon Liddy was a former White House counsel and was an special aide to the president. And E. Howard Hunt was also an aide to the president. So very close ties to the Nixon administration.
Including someone that quite literally has a degree and a license to uphold the law.
Yep. Bunch of lawyers. Gotta love it.
Yep.
And so the trial began on January 8th, 1973. The five men pleaded guilty. So the five originally arrested on the night of June 17th all pled guilty, and 2 were convicted. So Liddy and McCord refused to plead. They wouldn't cooperate with investigators initially. Liddy receives a very harsh sentence, actually, because he refuses to talk. He refuses to engage in the investigation, all for protection of the president. He's not going to speak. E. Howard Hunt pled guilty January 11th, and Judge Sirica interviewed him and tried to get more information from him about who else was involved in the cover-up, but Hunt didn't talk. And then the men, like I mentioned, from Miami, they all pled guilty on January 15th to all the counts that they were charged with and sentenced to their terms. But by the time the trial had begun, the FBI was in the middle of, deep investigating this. Like, what's going on? Why is there a burglary of the Democratic National Committee? Like, that just doesn't pass the sniff test, right? It's not your normal B&E. Why would you break into the Democratic National Committee?
Yep.
So it was almost immediately, right, that they knew something's going on. What's happening? Mm-hmm. And during their investigation, they discovered that there was a secret political slush fund under the control of former Attorney General John Mitchell.
Oh, God.
Millions of dollars, all used to try to fund various efforts to undermine the Democrats in the run-up to the election.
It's almost, I feel like I'm at a loss for words, because you almost want Watergate to have some larger meaning, in that, like, this was all because of Nixon's paranoia and his concern and belief that he would not fairly, successfully win an additional term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's like Watergate was really for this. Like, you really obstructed justice and potentially undermined an election for this.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me, and this is a total like side tangent, like weird thing to say, but I'm currently, my husband is making me watch Better Call Saul.
Oh, I love Better Call Saul.
Yeah. And so it reminds me so much of Saul Goodman, in that show, where I'm like, it's almost as if he's like works harder to do this not good thing than he would have if he just did the right thing.
Yep.
Like these people, like, he's working so hard to do it this way instead of just like running and doing a good job. And,
Yep.
It's just crazy. It doesn't make sense to me.
I think that's a absolutely perfect example, because it's like, what if you had dedicated your time and resources to, I don't know, doing good and running the country and doing well enough that people would want to fairly elect you a second time around.
Yeah. Well, and this is how paranoid this man was. Nixon was actually he was liked. He was heading into the election.
Right.
He had a very high approval rating. He was much more preferred than George McGovern.
Yes.
And in some of the other reading that I was doing, which isn't exactly related to Watergate, but I think it highlights just how corrupt and paranoid he was. They made efforts to make sure that George McGovern was the Democratic candidate. There was 2 candidates that could have been the potential. And I apologize, I can't remember the second candidate. But they wanted to make sure that they got George McGovern, because then they knew that they could tarnish him, right? Like, they knew, they could paint him as super, anti-establishment, super leftist, anti, the military. And so much of that, as I was doing the research for this episode, I'm like, wow, that sounds really familiar.
I was just about to say that. I am currently reading a book. It is called Frankly, We Did Win This Election, The Inside Story of How Trump Lost, by Michael Bender. And this theme comes up a lot in that book as well, that like once Biden had officially been selected as the Democratic nominee, Trump's campaign completely.
Here's the bourbon.
Here's the bourbon. Did you hear her? She's coming through.
Yes.
I mean, it completely changed Trump's campaign when oh, this is now who I'm competing with. Yep.
Yeah. Over and over again, I realized as I was doing the research for this episode and reading it for this episode and kind of seeing how people were reacting, I'm like, wow, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Feels really familiar, sadly.
Unfortunately. But circling back to our trial for our 7 defendants, the federal court judge, John Sirica, was appointed to the case. He was known as Maximum John for his sentences, and he would threaten people with prison time in order to get them to flip. He wanted them to squeal and give more information. So I'm like, hey, whatever works for you, right? He was very boisterous from the bench, so much so that he was criticized by the defense counsel for his inappropriate remarks he made. And the defense attorneys said he was acting, quote, as a prosecutor and investigator, end quote.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like defense attorneys are never really happy with the judge, but to go out there and risk pissing off your judge, I was like, oh, maybe he was acting a fool. Who knows?
Yeah.
And then, like I was mentioning, they discovered during the trial that Liddy was given about $332,000 to finance these intelligence gathering operations against the Democrats. So no other purpose than to track down and plant stories against the Democrats.
And those are campaign funds?
Yep.
Yeah.
They were all campaign contributions.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So G. Gordon Liddy and McCord were convicted on January 30th, 1973. And they were convicted of conspiring to burglarize, wiretap, and electronically eavesdrop on the Democratic Party's Watergate headquarters, burglarizing the Democratic headquarters with the intent to steal the property of another, burglarizing the Democratic headquarters with the intent to unlawfully wiretap and eavesdrop, and endeavoring to eavesdrop illegally. Lots of fines, lots of maximum sentences, anywhere between 5 and 15 years, depending on the count. And apparently they could not be served consecutively. So they would be served concurrently.
Wow.
So I don't know if there's something in the federal statute that provided that, but I did read that over and over again, that it was, they couldn't consecutively serve. So,
wow.
And then McCord was convicted on 2 additional counts: the possession of a device primarily useful for the surreptitious interception of oral communications, and possession of a device primarily useful for the surreptitious interception of wire communications. I'm really glad that I got that out before the bourbon kicked in.
That's a tough enough word sober.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the trial was supposed to reconvene on March 23rd to hear sentencing. And this is when James McCord admits in a letter to Judge John Sirica that he and other defendants were under pressure to remain silent, and names John Mitchell, the former Attorney General and acting chair of CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, as the overall boss of the operation.
Oh my God.
So the man who has just resigned his tenure to be the nation's top lawyer,
right,
was in control of undermining our democracy.
Mm-hmm.
The probably most infamous quote from his letter to the judge was, quote, "There was political pressure applied to the defendants to plead guilty and remain silent." End quote. And if McCord hoped that letter would stay in chambers, he was sorely,
of course not.
sorely mistaken. Because
we're talking about it today. So
Sirica read that letter in open court.
Oh my God, which, I love. I know that we all like to do this. This is one of the reasons we all love history, is because we love to put ourselves in the shoes of these people, and just to feel all the real human emotions. I'm glad that he confessed, he wrote that letter and he said his piece, but I imagine that there was a lot of turmoil and a lot of conflict and hardship when he chose to do that, right? So it's just those like human emotions of finally deciding to do the right thing and then totally getting blasted in open court like that.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. I think that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. And just I can't even imagine like participating in something like this, and then you're so far down the path, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I guess I'll own up to it now. I'm like,
yeah. I imagine your stomach is just in constant knots for literally 3 years straight. Your stomach is always in knots.
I wouldn't be. Yeah, my anxiety would not allow me to be a part of this. Thank you.
I mean, that's what I was thinking is like anytime, we do all experience things throughout life that cause us increased anxiety and your stomach hurts. And I just imagine in a situation like this, like my stomach would hurt the entire time for years.
I agree. Man. So Sirica, after reading this and Sirica, from everything that I read, he knew kind of almost immediately, as I think most anybody that was really paying attention to what was going on, was that this just didn't pass the sniff test. You can't just tell me you just randomly went in there. There was no other hands on this operation. And so he decides that in order to try to entice people to speak, that he would administer provisional sentences before offering them a deal to reduce their sentences if they decided to cooperate and share their stories. Mm-hmm. So this ploy worked, and defendants started cooperating. So on November 6, 1973 is when the 6 Watergate defendants were actually sentenced for their break-in. And we'll go into kind of maybe why it took so long. Mm-hmm. E. Howard Hunt was sentenced to 2.5 to 8 years and given a $10,000 fine for his involvement in the Watergate break-in. And G. Gordon Liddy was sentenced to 20 years, partially because, like I said before, he refused to cooperate with investigators. And so for anybody that was paying attention, it was the trial that we really start to find out that there was this massive conspiracy to try to get the president reelected, which is what prompted the Senate to open up their own investigative committee, which I know we'll get to in just a few moments. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of it's not necessarily the break-in in and of itself that brings Nixon down, right? It's the idea of the cover-up. So, what was he covering up? And the cover-up was coordinated and handled mainly by White House counsel John Dean. Jeb Stuart Magruder was a White House communications advisor, and he also had a pretty heavy role in the cover-up. And Nixon went on to claim on August 30th, 1972, that everything was investigated by Dean, who found absolutely no wrongdoing by the White House, and no one from the White House was involved.
Amazing how that happened.
Weird.
Don't we see that all the time? Like HR investigations at work and stuff. Like, we found that our company did nothing wrong. And you're like, cool, but it's still super toxic. So.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Nixon and the administration they were really focused on trying to contain it, right? That was part of the big cover up is, okay, they were caught, fine, but Nixon wasn't about to let anybody else go down for this. He didn't want it to touch his presidency. He wanted to remain kind of aloof and pretend that he didn't know what was going on. So he was really super committed. So they were, offering bribes and, saying, hey, if you just write it out, we'll take care of you. Wink, wink, nod, nod. And he almost got away with it, which is, again, if just a few things had gone his way, we wouldn't be here today.
The other thing, sorry, I keep interjecting, but
no, you're fine.
It does just keep coming back to really relevant times. Yeah. And just timing, and that we see this over and over throughout history. I'm watching right now the impeachment show about the Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky scandal, it's so good. But in watching that show, I'm reminded of Bill Clinton over and over denying his involvement in that scandal, right? And it's just like, how far do you go? How long do you deny before it's like, I mean, you can't. It's just amazing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the word I want is hubris, but maybe just the hubris of these presidents that they can deny over and over and over again and think that that's, it's just all going to be washed clean.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm a little bit more cynical because I think that perspective is like looking at it from like, yeah, of course, in hindsight, you're like, how, of course it was going to come out. Whereas like these things are like probably a very small percentage of the actual scandals and things that happen by leadership and government officials, not only in our country, but everywhere. And so I think the hubris, the assumption that it's not going to come out is probably
right,
based in reality that it very often doesn't. Like these are the one in a million times that actually do come out.
You're right.
And I think too, a little bit of ego, right? You know, they
100%.
They were
like,
Teflon.
It wouldn't happen to me.
Yeah. And even if it did, I'm fine. I'm perfect. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, you know, even later after he resigned, he went on to see to David Frost, I think is the one who interviewed him.
Right.
And said, well, when the president does it, it's not illegal. I'm like, oh, bro.
I know. And he thought that interview was going to like redeem his public appearance, and it very much did not. Yeah.
So while Nixon was busy trying to cover up exactly who was involved and where the directions came from, he tells his aides to tell the CIA to thwart the FBI investigation and says, don't look past anything past the break-ins and the ones who were arrested. A quote from the infamous tapes is, I don't give a shit what happens. I want you to stonewall it. Let them plead the Fifth Amendment, cover up, or anything else if it'll save the plan. So again, knowing he's kind of caught, right? Not just kind of wanting to own up to it and be like, you know what? It was a stupid thing. My bad. He's just like, nope, we got to save the plan.
My stomach hurts.
So he was paying hush money payments of upwards of $450,000 to these defendants and promised clemency for all of those involved as long as they didn't talk.
Oh.
But speaking of talking, this is where the wife of John Mitchell, Miss Martha Mitchell, comes into play. This, while I was researching this, I have to say, just as an aside, I became so angry about the situation that like I had to put it down.
Oh, God.
Go on a walk and then come back.
Yikes.
It was a bad marriage. Let's just say that. So Martha Mitchell, she was the wife of former Attorney General John Mitchell, the man who was in charge of the committee to reelect the president. And like I mentioned, the former Attorney General. So a man who above all else knows better.
Yes.
She was known as the mouth of the South, which, can we just take a minute to appreciate that?
Wow. I'm like, I need more details. Why? Why was she called the mouth of the South?
She's like, glad you asked.
The reason that she was known as the mouth of the South is she was a Southern lady, and she was known to have a few drinks and call journalists and gossip about what was happening in the administration.
Oh, you know what? Okay, I love that so much. And I have a coworker that I'm now going to secretly call the mouth of the South.
Oh my gosh.
And so the reason they were worried about Miss Martha is that she knew James McCord. So he had been her security. So James McCord was one of the ones that were arrested. And so Martha and James were actually, Martha and John were in California. Oh. And John,
I thought you were going to say they were
lovers.
In a relation. Yes. I was really ready for that.
I mean, that's all this needs is a secret love affair. It has everything else.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Martha and John were actually in California, I believe, on an event for the president. And John gets the call about the break-in, knows he's got to get back, and tells Martha, you go ahead and hang out in California to, quote, get some rest. He knew that if she caught wind of the details, that she would recognize James McCord and would likely, kind of get a little tipsy, call up some journalists, and the whole thing would be off. Mm-hmm. So according to her, an FBI agent by the name of Steve King was put in charge of guarding her and making sure that she didn't spill. She was to be kept away from all news coverage. And, they were really worried that if she learned of anything, that she would be the one to put the whole plot together and might make a phone call. Not to be deterred, she still called some journalists because she got all hot to trot. She was really mad. So she was on the phone with journalist Helen Thomas and was complaining and saying that she wanted to leave her husband unless he resigned from the committee to reelect the president. When Steve King, the man who was there to protect her, I say that with air quotes, discovered her on the phone and ripped the cord from the wall jack. Just ripped the whole cord.
Wow.
And when Thomas called back, she was told that Martha was not available. Now, obviously, if you're in the middle of the conversation, that does not sound right. You're going to call back and be like, hey, are you okay? What happened?
Of course. It's not like they got disconnected and then she just decided to go run some errands.
Yes.
There's clearly something wrong.
Yeah.
And so being the journalist that she is, not buying the story that Steve King told her, she calls John Mitchell and is saying, hey, I was on the phone with your wife. What happened? And he seemed unconcerned about the whole situation. So I'm just saying, for my husband, when he listens to this episode, if somebody calls you and says that they were on the phone with me and the call ended abruptly and you're not concerned, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
We have problems.
Yeah.
We gonna have problems.
Yeah, we gonna.
And so again, according to Martha, when she tried to escape because she got so irritated with the whole situation, she actually accidentally put her hand through a plate glass window. Yeah. And got all cut up and then got into a scuffle with Steve King, where then doctors were brought in to tranquilize her.
I'm at a loss.
Yeah.
Now, again, I think too, her husband likely sanctioned all of this.
Yes.
So you chose Richard Nixon over your wife.
Oh, God, I hate this so much. I hate this so much.
She was guarded by 5 men who held her down. And she actually has a condition or an effect named after her. It's the Martha Mitchell effect, when somebody is reporting something that seems so outrageous that nobody believes them, because she told people and nobody believed her. They all thought she was a drunk, that she was crazy, and that this could never happen. Nobody would ever do this to you.
Wow. A legacy of the Watergate scandal that I did not know at all.
Yeah.
The Martha effect. That's what you call it, the Martha effect?
The Martha Mitchell effect.
The Martha Mitchell effect. Wow.
When somebody tells you something so crazy, so outrageous that nobody believes them.
Wow.
And Nixon, oddly enough, because he can't, ever take the blame for his activities, even said, quote, if it hadn't been for Martha, there'd have been no Watergate, because John wasn't minding that store. He was practically out of his mind about Martha in the spring of 1972.
Wow. 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 It's the woman's fault. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's not John Mitchell's fault. It's not G. Gordon Liddy's fault. It's not Richard Nixon's fault.
Of
it's
course
not. No, it's Martha Mitchell, who was in California. What?
That is fascinating.
I have no words.
Right? So we're not done yet with the cover up. That was just what, see, this is when I was saying, so everybody, before we were recording, I was telling Leah and Rachel that I felt like the guy from the movie Horrible Bosses, when he's putting all of these pins on the map and there's lines going everywhere. They make memes about it now. Like, this went in so many different directions and in so many different tangents. It is mind-boggling.
Yeah. And I will repeat that I'm glad that we each tackle different components of this, namely you, Alicia, because it is so heavy. There is so much here.
Yeah.
And I still feel like even all of the stuff that we did, we're only going to scratch the surface.
Oh, of course.
Oh, yeah.
This could be a whole series in and of itself.
Absolutely.
So insane. On April 30th, 1973, L. Patrick Gary, who was the acting director of the FBI, resigns after admitting that he destroyed evidence connected to Watergate. So keeps going up the upper echelons of the government. And then in kind of one like last ditch effort to save himself, Nixon forces H.R. Haldeman, who was the chief of staff, and John Ehrlichman, who was a domestic affairs assistant, to resign. And he fires John Dean, who was the White House counsel. I think we all know who John Dean is, but he is the man who infamously went out against the president and testified in front of the Senate committee. Goes on television after this to say he didn't know anything, but, you know, he understands the buck stops with him, but that he had no knowledge of this. And so that's why these people had to go.
Of course. That makes perfect, logical, linear sense.
Exactly. No knowledge. He had nothing going on. He was too busy, you know, opening up China and securing peace in Vietnam that he had no idea what was going on, right? And so how do we find out that he was a big fat liar? Well, there are these little things called the Watergate tapes. So many presidents before Nixon actually had a recording system in the White House. So he was not original. I have to say this was new information for me. I did not realize that I just figured he was so paranoid that he wanted to make sure that people, if somebody was talking about him, that he would find out about it. But
no, you should listen to the Lyndon B. Johnson tapes when you have time. They are disgusting and wild and nothing you ever really want to hear. But yeah, it was pretty common for presidents to have, you know, taping systems within the White House.
Yes, crazy. So in my research, I figured that, or found out that originally it was FDR who placed the holes drilled into the floor so he could record his press conferences. Found out that Truman actually had a mic and a lampshade at his desk, and Eisenhower also recorded, and Kennedy and Johnson used a recording system installed by the United States Army Corps. So I guess the thing that Nixon didn't like about these original recording systems was that you had to remember to turn them on.
Yeah.
Well,
really.
I can very strongly relate to that. Technology, when you actually have to plug it into the wall to make it work.
So originally apparently he was notorious for being just a complete goof when it came to technology. He hated it. And so he got frustrated and was like, take the whole thing out. But they actually found a system that would turn on automatically and would be triggered by voices.
Wow. That's fancy for the late 60s. Wow.
So it was installed in 1971 by Haldeman. And it was installed in the Oval Office, the Lincoln sitting room, and the cabinet room. Wow. So only 3 people knew of the system's existence: Nixon, Haldeman, and an aide by the name of Butterfield.
And it was just triggered by, it could hear that people were talking. It wasn't necessarily, it's Rachel's voice, so we're going to turn on. There are any voices, so it would turn on. Yeah,
from what I gathered, it was any voice.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And so he installed the tapes, the recording system, to capture the history of the presidency so that he could. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So he could later use it in his memoirs.
Historical preservation, y'all.
Exactly. Except for, when he tried to destroy them.
Like, this isn't relevant. This doesn't matter.
This doesn't matter to history. You don't need to know this.
Yes.
And he claims that the reason why he never told anybody of their existence is because supposedly he wanted people to speak candidly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would want that too if I was, a corrupt president. Okay.
Well, and I'm like, so everybody's speaking candidly, including yourself, because did you forget that they were on? Because you've said some pretty terrible stuff, sir. Like terrible stuff. And I know he was paranoid and a racist and everything, but geez, I've listened to some of those tapes and I'm like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. To give an example of kind of a lighter, candid conversation going back to LBJ, some of the recordings that were picked up on his phone were talking about he's talking to his seamstress about how she needs to make the seams like in the crotch area longer because his ball sack is bigger than the average person's. It's like, did you forget that you installed a recording system?
Yeah.
And
you turned it on.
That's right. I'm like, and you turned it on.
You had to physically turn it on for that conversation, Rachel.
It's like, I want people to know about my schlong.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Ugh.
So because it automatically recorded between February 1971 and July of 1973, Nixon recorded over 3,000 hours of conversations.
Oh, wow.
And once John Dean, the White House counsel, who was the primary individual responsible for the cover-up, once he started cooperating, Nixon initially thought the tapes should be destroyed. This was before they were disclosed to the public. So before anybody even had a chance to subpoena them or ask for them, or before the Supreme Court case that forced their turnover, he had a conversation about getting them destroyed. So again, one of those things, had he destroyed them.
Yep. We wouldn't be talking about this on a podcast, 40, 50 years later.
And it was actually the White House aide, Butterfield, who disclosed the existence of the tapes in his testimony in front of the Senate Watergate committee. And initially, Nixon refused to provide copies of the tapes and tried to say that they were protected due to, quote, executive privilege.
Yeah.
And in his quote, where he tried so eloquently to walk back his abilities to, walk back his reasonings for not wanting to cooperate, he said, quote, "This principle of confidentiality of presidential conversations is at stake in the question of these tapes. I must and I shall oppose any efforts to destroy this principle, which is so vital to the conduct of this great office." End quote. So as we know, and as I think we're about to cover here in just a few minutes, Judge Sirica and the Senate Committee and Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox did not believe Nixon's word for it and continued requesting access to the tapes. And ultimately, the case as to whether or not the tapes were a matter of presidential or executive privilege would be decided by the Supreme Court of the United States.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm going to take it over. So, unsurprisingly, like you said, this went to the Supreme Court. One very smart move, in my opinion, was when then Justice William Rehnquist, I believe it is, who had just been recently appointed to his position by none other than Nixon himself, and had previously served under Nixon's Department of Justice. He actually took himself off of the case, making the total number of voting justices 8 at the time. Mm-hmm. So on July 24th, 1974, in United States versus Nixon, the court ruled unanimously 8-0 that claims of executive privilege over the tapes were void. The court ordered the president to release the tapes to the special prosecutor on July 30th, 1974. Nixon complied with the order and released the subpoenaed tapes to the public.
Crazy.
So, yes, crazy. So obviously there was a mass investigation conducted to determine what all had happened and what exactly Nixon's involvement had been. The two major investigators in this case were actually Washington Post journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, which I just find that so fascinating. Anytime you look into the Watergate investigation, essentially it came down to these journalists.
Mm-hmm.
A major source of the information that these journalists received came from an anonymous source whom they nicknamed Deep Throat. Deep Throat, yeah. Yeah. Deep Throat, who would later be revealed as an FBI whistleblower, was able to verify for the journalists that the Watergate scandal had ties back to, as we already know, the FBI, CIA, the White House, and so on. Through their reporting, they were able to verify Nixon's direct involvement in the incident. Namely, in addition to thousands in hush money that you've already talked about, Alicia, they were able to specifically identify a $25,000 check that was designated for the Nixon campaign that went directly into the bank account of Bernard Barker, whom you already mentioned was arrested in the break-in. They found that the Watergate scandal was only a small part of a larger scale effort to use wiretapping, spying, and other deceptive methods in Nixon's re-election campaign. The Nixon administration pushed back on the reporting, saying that Watergate was being blown out of proportion due to, quote, a liberal agenda, unquote. But what would be revealed in the reporting would negate all of that. Woodward and Bernstein would blow the top off of this scandal. And this is just an interesting side note, but Woodward and Bernstein's reporting would end up winning them a Pulitzer Prize. They would go on to write a best-selling book titled All the President's Men, which we also know, now as a movie. And in the wake of the Watergate scandal, journalism majors throughout the United States would reach an all-time high. I love that legacy of this scandal.
I love that
really
too.
Cool.
Yeah.
So there was a specific tape that was called the smoking gun tape, and this tape destroyed Nixon politically. The congressmen who had previously voted against impeachment now announced they would support his impeachment, stating the tapes showed he was very clearly obstructing justice.
Mm-hmm.
Even the House leader of Nixon's own party, Rhodes, stated he would back the impeachment, saying, quote, cover-up of criminal activity and misuse of federal agencies can neither be condoned nor tolerated, end quote. According to Rhodes, in a conversation with Nixon that took place on August 7th, only 75 House representatives were willing to vote against impeaching Nixon for obstructing justice. Similarly, Senators Goldwater and Scott told the president that there were enough votes in the Senate to convict him and that only 15 senators were willing to vote for acquittal, not even half of the 34 votes he needed to stay in office. So Nixon finally made a big boy decision, and facing what seemed to be the inevitability that he would be removed from office anyways, he decided to resign as president of the United States. In a nationally televised address from the Oval Office on August 8th, 1974, President Nixon stated, and this is a direct quote, just a portion of his statement, he said, I would have preferred to carry through to the finish whatever the personal agony it would have involved, and my family unanimously urged me to do so. But the interest of the nation must always come before any personal considerations. That wasn't true when you were paying people to do slimy things. Continuing on. From the discussions I have had with congressional and other leaders, I have concluded that because of the Watergate matter, I might not have the support of the Congress that I would consider necessary to back the very difficult decisions and carry out the duties of this office in the way the interests of the nation would require.
Yeah, I love how he still doesn't really take responsibility or accountability for
Right?
the whole thing.
No.
It's
Right?
like, apparently the American public don't want me to continue to do this job. So in your interest, I will not.
Yeah. It's
And also
definitely
because I know I'm
not-
going to get convicted. So I guess I'll just, I'll quit before you can fire me.
Yes. It's really the entire speech is totally available online and you can read it. At no point does he actually take any sort of credit or any accountability for any part in the scandal at all. So the morning that his resignation took effect, the president, with his wife and family, exited the White House, leaving Vice President Ford large and in charge. So Congress immediately dropped its impeachment proceedings after Nixon's resignation, but this still left federal criminal prosecution as a possibility. But as stated before, Nixon was succeeded by Vice President Ford, the man Nixon placed into office, who issued a full and unconditional pardon of Nixon and any crimes he had, quote, committed or may not have committed, end quote.
Ridiculous.
My eyes are rolling to the back of my head.
Committed or may not have committed.
Yeah, he may any transgressions he might have committed or not committed. Like,
oh my
so
God.
stupid. Okay. So Ford stated to the nation that he felt the pardon was in the best interest of the country. Again, my eyes are rolling. Or was it in the best interest of the dude who hired you, Gerald? Anyway, he went on to say that Watergate, and this is another quote, is an American tragedy in which we all have played a part. It could go on and on and on, or someone must write the end to it. I have concluded that only I can do that. And if I can, I must.
The egos of all of these people.
Yeah. So some political commentators now argue that this move by Ford may have lost him the presidential election of 1976, because even this move, unsurprisingly, was plagued with conspiracy and mistrust. Allegations that Ford may have made a secret deal with Nixon ahead of time, that he would pardon him if Nixon resigned, leaving Ford as president, circulated widely. These allegations left Ford to testify before the House Judiciary Committee on October 17th, 1974, and further tainted any future possibility of his election.
Yeah. So I feel like I've learned a lot. But I'm going to close this out with the legacy of the Watergate scandal. And the legacy of the scandal is so great. I mean, there's a reason that we're still talking about this today. We mentioned that several times, that here we are 40, 50 years later, still talking about this. When you think of Nixon's presidency, the primary thing anyone is ever able to recall about it is Watergate. It's because of Watergate that more modern day scandals all have gate as a suffix. In fact, since the Watergate scandal, approximately 200 other such scandals have taken on the quote Gate, unquote name. The scandal would result ultimately in 69 government officials charged with crimes, many of which would serve time in prison for them. Following the scandal, things would shift in favor of the Democratic Party, which is ironic given that this scandal all came about because we were trying to continue to secure a Republican president. But things would shift, of course, in favor of the Democratic Party, with Democrats gaining 5 seats in the Senate and 49 in the House of Representatives.
Wow.
This scandal, yes. This scandal, in addition to Gerald Ford's subsequent unpopular pardon of Nixon, would lead to Ford's eventual presidential defeat against Democrat Jimmy Carter. Watergate also displayed a perfect example of how the Supreme Court can always prevail. You know, as Leah already talked about, in a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court essentially determined that the president of the United States is not above the law and that he or she does not get special executive privileges just by nature of the position. This alone is huge. This is one of the largest legacies of the Watergate scandal. Another, small legacy that I wanted to mention just because it personally applies to me as a certified paralegal who works in the legal field for my day job. The Watergate scandal led to a wave of reform throughout the legal profession. In order to be accredited by the American Bar Association, law schools now are required to teach courses in ethics. And for all attorneys and paralegals alike, in order to maintain our licenses and our certificates, we must complete a certain number of hours of continuing education in ethics every single year, which is like so much fun to do. In addition to all the other things I do at my day job, it's like so much fun to also do my continuing education. Thank you, Nixon. Finally, Watergate would overall result in a wave of deep distrust of politicians. During the Vietnam War, when many Americans were already critical of the government, Watergate furthered those deep feelings of resentment, distrust, and doubt, much of which can still be seen today.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, peeps, we have covered the Watergate scandal.
Wow.
And yet I feel like we've barely scratched the surface.
Yep. This feels like in SpongeBob where it's like 12 hours later.
I agree. Well, again, I want to thank Rachel and Leah. Thank you so much for the assist and for coming on Civics and Coffee. I'm so happy you ladies came on. I'm so excited.
Oh my
God.
gosh.
It was a blast.
Yes. And I learned so much.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I know. I had to make sure my research game was strong, and I had to pick out random facts because I'm like, I know Rachel and Leah. They're gonna know the main brushstrokes. I got to find the deep cuts when I talk about Watergate. Mm-hmm. And of course, everybody, make sure you go and follow and listen to #history. Not only will you get fabulous history podcast shows, you also get wonderful and delicious cocktail recipes. So you get to drink along with getting your history. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
It really
Most
is.
of the time, delicious.
Mm-hmm. Most of the time, yes.
Most of the time.
Thank you so much, ladies. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there you have it, folks. As promised, G. Gordon Liddy was one of the chiefs of the covert team known as the Plumbers. A former CIA operative and practicing attorney, Liddy acted as a liaison between the administration and his Special Investigation Unit and met frequently with the likes of John Mitchell and acting White House counsel John Dean. E. Howard Hunt was also a former CIA operative and member of the infamous Plumbers team. He conducted a series of missions for the Nixon administration, including hatching a plot to assassinate a journalist. Hunt was the organizer of the Watergate bugging operation and worked closely with Liddy. He pressured senior White House officials to secure hush money payments for those arrested. And that is the Watergate scandal, as told to you from me and the ladies at #history. Go give them a follow. You can find them on Instagram and Twitter, or everywhere you get your pods. Enjoy your weekend. I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Civics and Coffee. If you want to hear more small snippets from American history, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to our next cup of coffee together.